Give me just 1 second here, everybody. All right. All right, it looks like we're finally live here. Thanks. I guess power's down around the area here, so we may have some, hopefully we will be okay. I haven't had any problems here at the studio, but yeah, forgive me for the delay. So it looks like we're up now, we're live, so let's go ahead and move forward. I'm Reverend Dave Thompson, and I'm a civil human minister, and what that means is that I focus my ministry on building human peace and common ground. And in that effort, I'm looking at my own spiritual background to look at the teachings of Jesus and to try to find those teachings that I feel are applicable across the board to all humans, regardless of our faith or our different politics or our different lifestyles. So let's go ahead and jump into it. Actually, we're in a series on the end times. This is Jesus's conversation about what's going to happen at the end of the world and his coming back. So this is the section that we're talking about today. And it's Matthew chapter 24, verses 32 through 44. So beginning in verse 32. Do we have audio, everybody? Let's just check here. I think we do now. Yes. Okay. Sorry about that. Verse 32. Now learn this parable from the fig tree. When its branch has already become tender and puts forth leaves, you know that summer is near. So you also, when you see all things, know that it is near at the very doors. Assuredly I say to you, this generation will by no means pass away till all these things are fulfilled. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will by no means pass away. But of that day and hour no one knows, no, not even the angels in heaven, but my Father only. But as the days of Noah were, so also the coming of the Son of Man be. For as in the days before the flood, they were eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage, until the day that Noah entered the ark, and did not know until the flood came and took them all. So also will be the coming of the Son of Man. Then 2 men will be in the field, one will be taken and the other left. 2 women will be grinding at the mill, one will be taken and the other left. Watch therefore, for you do not know what hour the Lord is coming. But know this, that if the master of the house had known what hour the thief would come, he would have watched and not allowed his house to be broken into. Therefore, you also be ready, for the Son of Man is coming at an hour when you do not expect him. So we're continuing our conversation in the end times. And so what this is Jesus's sort of moments after he's gone through the temple. This is the capital city, Jerusalem, where Jesus has really just rebuked the spiritual leaders of his time, his pastors and elders and bishops, and done that very publicly, and is now on his way out and is sitting talking to the disciples about the fact that the nation of the Jewish nation is going to go through a tremendous, difficult and tribulational time. The temple is going to be destroyed, and so he talks about that, and his disciples are wondering when all this stuff is going to happen, and Jesus claims that he's going to come back. So when is this going to happen? This is what he's talking about now in the story. He's trying to tell us of what to look for. So we open up on this analogy of a fig tree. And it's nothing too crazy, right? This passage today is pretty straightforward. So there's not a lot of things to unravel here. But I want to talk a little bit about what the fig tree represents. So this fig tree, he says, you look at it, you look at its branches, you look at its leaves, and you know that when its branches become tender and the leaves begin to sprout, you know summer is on its way. And so, he's really pointing out the fact here, look, you can see things are coming down the road. And so you shouldn't be surprised that the end is, when the end comes, what it's going to look like, and that it really shouldn't be a big surprise. And then he mentions this weird thing about the Jewish people not passing away until the end of the world, which is, an interesting phrase. I'm not exactly sure what to do with that, frankly, in this passage. I'm trying to be honest with you as much as possible when I can't quite figure out what interpretation needs to be applied here. But then he says this conversation about the Son of Man coming back, and when he returns, that there will be two men in a field, one will be taken and the other left. There will be two women grinding in a mill, one taken and the other left. And of course, in this conversation, it's talking in agricultural terms. The men in the field are plowing and attending to the field. The women are taking the grain and using a millstone and grinding it down into flour and other things to be used for consumption. And then he says, you don't know when the day or hour is going to come. So what on earth is this all about? And why is the fig tree important? What does it represent in this conversation? Well, the fig tree is just basically an analogy to talk about the fact that we shouldn't be surprised when the end comes. And I want to talk a little bit about this because this sort of wraps into the whole conversation about climate change, right? It's no surprise that our planet is warming, that we're losing ice at the polar ice caps, that sea levels are rising, that the weather's becoming much more tumultuous. California is on fire every year, and as one who's living near the wildfires and actually been evacuated from my own home as a result of them, the realities of our climate changing is something to pay attention to. We as a human race really should pay attention to the handwriting on the wall. And what I mean by that is that a lot of people right now want to dismiss those things. They just want to not acknowledge them or say that it's not happening. And sure, their argument may be that this is just a natural cycle of the planet, right? It gets warmer, it gets colder, it gets warmer, it gets colder. And we've seen that in the past, but not to the extent it seems so far. And either way, being prepared for what comes down the road is going to be critical for us as a species. When it comes to this conversation, I came from a very conservative religious background, so Pentecostal holiness, and the experience when it comes to the end of the world was very much an important conversation, and was sort of drilled into us that Jesus is going to come back and you never know when it's going to happen. So you always need to be terrified because you just never know when Jesus might come back and catch you doing a sin, right? I mean, that's the horrible worry that we were always taught to look at. And we were always sort of terrified that the rapture was going to happen. They had a number of movies that came out. I've talked about it before, Thief in the Night. That's actually referencing this verse where it talks about the master not knowing when the thief was coming, otherwise he would have prepared his household for it. The reality is that for me, coming out of that conversation and out of that background, there's still some of it that sticks with me. Do I know if this is the way it's really going to happen? I don't. I look at these verses like you as a human being and have to make judgment calls based upon it. There seems to be a conversation about the fact that the end will come. As for Jesus returning, I think that would be fantastic. I would love it. I really would absolutely desire and hope that he does come back, because frankly, our churches and our ministers, I think, have moved a great deal away from the teachings of Jesus. And I think that if he did come back, many of them wouldn't recognize him or might assign him, a derogatory term like they already do for people who are liberal or socialist or whatever. And I'm not saying that Jesus is either one of those in particular, but when and if he comes back, I hope that's the case, and I hope that it brings us into this next sort of stage of our development as species to be able to work a little bit more closely with a more intelligent being that has hand in hand in our development. Either way, this particular passage was pretty difficult for me to try to find something that is usable as a human being, because a lot of this is sort of predicated and assumes that the reader believes, first of all, that Jesus existed and that Jesus is, God in some measure and the Son of God, and that he's going to be returning. And as my conversation is really more about humanity and the things that we can all believe together, those particular teachings make it difficult for me to translate it into our modern conversation and teachings that I think that all humans can look to. But that said, I do think that we have to pay attention to the reality of the world as it is right now, not just climate change. I'm talking about our cultural challenges that we're facing right now. We as a globe have never faced the kinds of challenges to our basic fundamental ideas in life. We've never had to really live alongside people who think completely opposite of us and have different worldviews altogether and have different languages and have different customs. In some ways it was this way in the United States, but we had the Great West, we had all these lands that hadn't been developed yet and people could go out and to be pioneers in, but now there's no more space. And now all of our countries are beginning to bleed into each other. The internet has made it almost impossible for us to be free from the rest of the globe. And whereas we used to live in these little silos, these little ethnic and religious and cultural silos, bubbles, if you will, around the world, that luxury is not any longer possible for us. And as we begin to look at the signs of some of the challenges that we are going to face as a globe, especially when we're trying to consider how to exist as a species, not only to not overpopulate our planet, not only to monitor its climate, but also how to live in peace, because there's no more room on this planet for us to go and start a new society on. And, until we get to the moon or Mars, I don't really see that happening. So what are we going to do right now? I think we need to take a step back and start thinking about how we get along. To think about instead of fighting for who's going to be in power over the political system, instead of fighting to see whose religion should be able to dictate what morals our society should have, instead of doing that, I believe that we should look at ways to find common ground. Because after 20 years of reaching across the board religiously and politically, I discovered that there was far more that we agree on than we disagree on. And the things that we disagree on, generally speaking, everybody has their own opinion on it, and most people are happy knowing that people have different opinions on the matter. So looking for ways for us to discover those basic shared rules that we can all live by, I think is one way that we can take from this passage to see that we've got to pay attention to times that are going to come, the times that are going to be frustrating, the times that are going to be tribulation for us and a struggle for us as a human race. And we need to be prepared to set aside our own prejudices, to set aside our anger, and to come together and to start talking about peace and to start talking about common ground. I want to thank you. I'm keeping this one particularly short, this study, only because I didn't, there wasn't as much as I here in the passage to relay as a human being. So I just wanted to keep it short. There's no reason to, expound on something that I don't think needs to be. I'm interested to finish this end times conversation out, which is just a couple of more studies. And then we get into some really interesting conversation about Jesus and the crucifixion and his time being captured and being betrayed and being put to death and then raising from the dead. I'm excited to talk about those things because I know we've heard a lot of them before, but there's some things that I think that we forget or neglect to realize about what happened back then that are important for us to consider now, even today. I thank you for joining me this morning, and I appreciate your patience this morning as we're dealing with a windstorm here in the Sacramento area. It's knocking out different power grids, so thank you for your patience as we kind of figured out the technical difficulties of the show. I'm looking forward to seeing you tomorrow, and please, if you have comments or suggestions, please leave those in the comments below the video. I love it when you provide that feedback. It really is helpful for me and for others who are in the study as well. I would love it if you would like the Facebook page, and if you're on YouTube, there's a button down here that you can click to subscribe. That way we can stay in contact with one another. There's some really exciting programs and things that are going to be coming up after this particular study that I'm excited to share with you. So until tomorrow, when I see you again live at noon, I want you to know that I love you. Now, this is the American Sign Language sign for I love you. And I hope that you choose to love yourself. It's the only love in this world that we really have any control over. And now I would invite you to join me as we go about the rest of our day, loving our neighbors the same way. Thank you.